The big house was quiet again. Too quiet. Outside, a few balloons swayed in the wind, tied to the gate like they were waiting for someone who would never come. Inside, the smell of vanilla cake filled the wide dining room. The table was full of colors, cupcakes, cookies, small wrapped gifts, but no one was there to enjoy them. In the middle of that empty celebration sat a young girl, around 12 years old. Her name was Ella Larkins. She had long, soft hair and kind eyes that always seemed to listen, even though she could not hear. Ella was deaf from birth. To her, the world was made of light, movement, and the silent expressions of people's faces. She sat at the table, her hands resting near her lap, looking at the clock on the wall. The big silver clock ticked quietly, each second a reminder that another minute of her birthday was passing by without anyone beside her. The house was beautiful. Tall ceilings, marble floors, gold frames on the walls, but it felt like a museum more than a home. Everything was perfect, polished, and lifeless. Her father, Charles Larkins, was a man everyone in the city knew. He owned a chain of businesses, drove fancy cars, and always wore expensive suits. People admired him, called him powerful and successful. But at home, success felt like distance. Ella saw him less and less each year. That morning, she had woken up to a message on her tablet. It was from her father. The message said, "Happy birthday, Ella. I'm so proud of you. I'll try to make it back home tonight. Love, Dad." She smiled when she read it, even though her chest felt heavy. He always wrote that he'd try, but trying and doing were not the same. She looked around her empty house and realized she already knew how this day would end. The helpers in the house had done their best to make it special. The cook baked her favorite cake, chocolate and cream with strawberries on top. The driver had picked up colorful balloons. Even the housekeeper had left her a small gift, a notebook with a pink ribbon. They all smiled kindly, but after their duties were done, they returned to their own homes and families. Now only Ella remained. She cut herself a small piece of cake and put it on a plate. The first bite was sweet, but it didn't taste like celebration. She looked at the empty chairs and wondered if her mother would have been there if she were alive. Her mother had died when Ella was little, and though Ella could barely remember her, she always felt a soft emptiness when she thought of her. The walls seemed to echo with a kind of silence only she could understand. Deep, endless, and heavy. She looked out the window. The sky was gray, but patches of sunlight broke through sometimes. In the garden, the flowers moved gently with the breeze. She wished she could hear them, the sound of leaves, the wind, maybe birds singing. But she couldn't. All she could do was imagine. To pass the time, she picked up her drawing book and started sketching. Drawing had always been her comfort. When she drew, she didn't feel left out or different. She felt free. Her fingers moved quickly, sketching the garden outside, the trees, the sky, and a little figure of herself standing alone by the gate. She sighed. Her tutor, who taught her sign language and lip reading, once told her, "Ella, your hands speak the loudest when your heart is quiet." She didn't fully understand it then, but now it made sense. Even in her silence, she had her own voice. But sometimes she wished someone else could hear it too. The digital clock on the table blinked 4:00 p.m. Her father was still not home. She picked up her tablet again, hoping for a message. There was none. Instead, there were emails, business notifications, meeting reminders, all from his company. She pushed the tablet aside. Her throat felt tight. She didn't want to cry. Crying didn't change anything. Then she looked at the small box wrapped in gold paper sitting at the end of the table. It was from her father. The note on it said, "Open when I'm home." But what if he didn't come home tonight? Her eyes stayed on the box for a long time before she slowly reached out and touched the ribbon. She wanted to wait, but she also wanted to feel close to him even if he wasn't there. After a moment of hesitation, she carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a new tablet, even bigger than the one she had. The screen lit up instantly. On it, there was a message waiting. "For my princess. Let's talk more through video calls when I'm away. I love you." She smiled faintly. It was a sweet thought, but she didn't need another device. She just wanted him to be here, sitting next to her, eating cake, making her laugh. But he was somewhere in another city, shaking hands, signing papers, talking about money. Her small smile faded. The clock showed 6:09 p.m. now. Outside, the light was dimming. Ella walked to the window and pressed her hand against the glass. Across the street, she saw a few children playing with balloons and running with their parents. The sound of laughter wasn't something she could hear, but she could see it. The way their mouths opened wide, the way their shoulders shook. It looked warm. She wanted to be part of something like that. Simple, noisy, alive. Her tutor had told her once that birthdays were meant to be shared. Not because of gifts, but because of people. People make memories, not things. But Ella's life had been full of things. The house was filled with them. Dolls, dresses, gadgets, art supplies, but not people. At 7, she decided she didn't want to stay inside anymore. She took her small backpack, slipped on her white sneakers, and walked out quietly. The bodyguard at the gate noticed her but didn't stop her. He had seen her walk to the nearby park many times. It was a safe, calm place just a few minutes away. As she stepped outside, the wind brushed her face and she smiled a little. The air felt real, fresh, not trapped inside marble walls. The park wasn't crowded that evening. A few parents sat on benches watching their children play. A couple of kids chased each other with sticks, pretending to be knights. A woman jogged past, her headphones on. Ella found her favorite spot near the old oak tree and sat down. She liked to feel the vibrations of the ground when people walked by. It was her way of sensing the world's rhythm. She opened her drawing pad again and started sketching the playground. In her sketch, she drew everyone smiling, laughing, holding hands. She added herself too, but in her drawing, she wasn't sitting alone. There were people around her smiling back. She didn't notice the time passing. The sky turned orange and the air smelled of cut grass. From across the park, a small boy ran past her and dropped his toy car. She picked it up and held it out to him. When he turned, she saw that he was with a man, probably his father. The man smiled at her and signed something with his hands. She froze. He had signed the word "thank you." It was small and quick, but she saw it clearly. Her eyes widened. Very few people outside her school or tutor knew sign language. She watched him walk toward her, holding his son's hand. He signed again, slower this time. "You know sign?" She nodded, surprised and curious. He smiled warmly. His son waved at her, cheerful and friendly. She smiled back, her hands hesitating before signing. "Yes. You?" He nodded. His signs were confident, practiced. She wondered how he learned. Before she could ask, his son tugged his sleeve, wanting to play again. The man laughed silently, nodding to the boy, then turned back to Ella and signed, "Maybe we talk later?" She nodded shyly. When they walked away, she felt something unusual, a spark of excitement. Someone had spoken her language. Not through sound, not through pity, but through understanding. She closed her sketchbook slowly, her thoughts swirling. Maybe birthdays weren't only about who was missing, but also about who might still come into your life. For the first time that day, she didn't feel completely alone. As the evening light faded and the street lamps began to glow, she looked up at the sky and smiled. Somewhere far away, her father was probably still working, unaware of how lonely his daughter felt. But in that moment, something inside her shifted, a small warmth that whispered, "Maybe tomorrow will be different." She stayed there for a while, watching the father and son laugh together in the distance. It was a picture she wished she could frame forever. And even though no one had sung her happy birthday, Ella felt something close to happiness for the first time that day. Not from the gifts or the cake or the big house, but from the simple, quiet connection with a stranger who had spoken her language. The next morning, the sunlight slowly crept into Ella's room, sliding across her desk and over her sketchbook from the night before. She woke up early, her thoughts still filled with the moment she had shared at the park. She couldn't forget the way that man had looked at her when he signed. It was such a small thing, but for her it felt huge. In a world that often spoke too loudly for her to understand, a single gesture had made her feel seen. She sat up in bed and smiled. Maybe today she would see him again. Maybe he would bring his little boy back to the park. Ella didn't tell her father anything about last night. There was nothing to tell, really. He hadn't come home until after midnight. She had seen the headlights of his car from her window, but she had already been half asleep, too tired to pretend she wasn't disappointed again. Now, as she got ready for the day, she wore her favorite yellow sweater, the one her mother had bought her years ago. It was a bit small now, but it still made her feel warm. She brushed her hair, packed her sketchbook, and slipped her hearing aid into place. It didn't give her full hearing, only a few muffled vibrations and faint tones, but it helped her feel connected in some way. Downstairs, The housekeeper greeted her with a smile and offered her breakfast, pancakes, fruit, and milk. Ella thanked her in sign language, and the woman smiled again, though she didn't really understand the signs. She only knew the basics in thank you, good morning, eat. Ella ate quickly. Her eyes kept drifting toward the window, where the trees outside danced in the soft breeze. By 10 o'clock, she was already walking toward the park again. The path was quiet. The sound of distant traffic blended with birds fluttering across the sky. Though she couldn't hear them, she could see them move in rhythm. She liked to imagine their sounds like tiny whispers of happiness. When she reached the park, she looked around. The benches were half empty and a few people were reading newspapers or walking their dogs. For a moment, she felt unsure. What if he wasn't there today? But then, near the same old oak tree, she saw him. He was sitting on the grass, fixing something with his hands. His little boy, the same cheerful child from yesterday, was beside him, holding a toy airplane. Ella felt her heart beat a little faster. She hesitated for a second, then started walking toward them. When the man looked up and saw her, his face lit up with a kind smile. He signed, "Hello again." She smiled back, signing, "Hi." He pointed to the grass beside him, asking if she wanted to sit. She nodded and sat down carefully. The boy, who looked about 6, grinned at her and held out his airplane proudly. He said something. She couldn't hear the words, but she read his lips. "It's blue. My favorite color." She laughed silently and nodded. His joy was easy to understand even without words. The man watched them for a moment, then began signing slowly so she could follow. "My name is Tom. This is my son, Leo." She signed her name back. "Ella." Tom's smile widened. "Nice to meet you, Ella." They sat in the shade for a while. Leo ran around with his airplane, making swooping motions, pretending to fly. Ella watched him with amusement, sketching him in her notebook. After a few minutes, Tom noticed her drawing. "You draw?" He signed. She nodded, showing him her sketchbook. Inside were pages filled with drawings: trees, people, the park, even the swing where Leo was playing. He flipped through the pages carefully, his face showing quiet admiration. "These are very good," he signed. "You have a gift." Ella blushed and looked down, signing softly, "Thank you." "I like to draw when I feel lonely." Tom's expression changed slightly. His eyes softened. "I understand," he signed. "Sometimes silence can feel heavy." She looked at him curiously. "You know sign language very well," she signed. He paused, then nodded. "My wife was deaf," he signed slowly. "I learned because of her." Her eyes widened. "Was?" She signed gently. He looked down at the grass, his hands still for a moment. "She passed away 3 years ago," he signed. Leo was very young. Ella felt a quiet ache in her chest. She wanted to say something kind, but words, even in sign, felt small. Finally, she signed, "I'm sorry." He gave a small smile, the kind that hides a bit of pain. "Thank you. But she taught me something important, that silence isn't empty. It's full of things people don't notice." Ella thought about that for a moment. She had never heard anyone describe silence that way. It made her heart feel warm. After a while, Leo came running back, breathless and laughing. He handed Ella a flower, a small white daisy he had picked. She smiled, holding it gently between her fingers. Tom signed to his son, "Say thank you." Leo turned to Ella and said the words aloud. "Thank you." Even though she couldn't hear it clearly, she read his lips and nodded. She signed back, "You're welcome." Leo giggled and tried to copy her signs. His small hands moved clumsily, but she laughed silently and corrected him, showing him the right way. Tom watched them, his expression soft and thoughtful. They stayed like that for a long time, playing, signing, and sharing small smiles. Time seemed to move slower there under the oak tree. For Ella, it was the first time in a long while that she felt completely understood. Tom didn't rush his signs. He didn't pity her or look away when she couldn't follow. He was patient, gentle, and kind. At one point, Tom signed, "Do you come here often?" She nodded. "Almost every day after my lessons." "Do you live nearby?" he asked. She pointed toward the tall iron gates in the distance. "That big house," he looked surprised. "The Larkins' house." She nodded. He raised his brows, impressed. "Your father is Mr. Larkins?" She hesitated, then signed, "Yes, he works a lot." There was no bitterness in her movements, only quiet honesty. Tom nodded slowly. That must be hard. Ella shrugged. He tries. He just doesn't know my world. Tom looked at her, understanding exactly what she meant. As the sun moved higher in the sky, they shared stories. Or rather, Tom told most of them, signing as he spoke. He told her about his small repair shop, about how Leo liked to help by holding tools that were never needed, and about the funny customers he met. Ella laughed silently several times, her hands moving quickly to reply. She told him about her drawings, about how she liked to watch people's faces and imagine the sounds behind their laughter. For once, it didn't feel like she was explaining herself to someone who couldn't understand. It felt natural. When it was time to leave, Tom signed, "We'll come again tomorrow." "Same time?" Ella nodded, smiling so widely that her eyes sparkled. As they walked away, Leo turned and waved both hands at her. She waved back until they disappeared down the path. That night, when she returned home, the house was quiet again, but the silence didn't feel so heavy anymore. She sat on her bed and looked at the little daisy Leo had given her. It had started to wilt slightly, but it still looked beautiful to her. She placed it carefully inside her sketchbook and wrote under it, "The day someone spoke to me without words." For dinner, her father was home surprisingly early. He seemed tired, his face buried in papers. When he looked up and saw her, he smiled faintly. He tried to talk and slowly, carefully, so she could read his lips. "How was your day?" Ella smiled. She wanted to tell him everything. About Tom, about Leo, about how good it felt to finally have someone who understood sign language. But she stopped herself. Instead, she just said, "It was nice." Her father nodded, already looking back at his papers. Later that night, she stood by her window again, looking out at the park in the distance. The city lights twinkled softly. Somewhere out there, Tom and Leo were probably having dinner together, laughing, talking, being what families were meant to be. She didn't feel jealous. Not anymore. She felt grateful that she had met them. Before going to bed, she picked up her tablet and opened a blank page. She started to draw again. This time, she drew 3 figures sitting under a tree, a man, a boy, and a girl with a flower in her hair. As she shaded the last line, she smiled. Tomorrow she would go to the park again, and maybe, just maybe, her world was starting to change, one silent word at a time. The next day, the park looked even brighter than usual. The sky was clear and a soft wind played with the leaves. Ella could feel it brushing against her cheeks as she walked along the path, holding her sketchbook close to her chest. She didn't know why, but her steps felt lighter that morning. It was as if something inside her was excited to see what the day would bring. For so long, her days had felt the same, quiet, slow, and lonely. But now there was something to look forward to. When she reached the old oak tree, she spotted Tom and his son right away. Leo was running in circles with a bright red kite, his laughter visible in the way his mouth opened wide. Tom stood nearby, holding the string so the kite wouldn't fly away completely. As soon as Leo noticed Ella, he waved both hands high in the air. She smiled and waved back. Tom turned and saw her too. He smiled warmly, the kind of smile that felt like sunlight. He signed, "You came." She nodded quickly and signed back, "Of course." He gestured toward the grass. "Come sit." She sat beside him, watching as Leo tried to make the kite go higher. The boy's face glowed with pure happiness, and Ella couldn't stop smiling at his joy. After a moment, Tom signed, "You like kites?" Ella nodded. "I've never flown one, though." His eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Never?" She shook her head and laughed silently. "No one taught me." Tom looked at her for a second, then smiled mischievously. "Then today is your first lesson." Before she could reply, he handed her the kite string. She hesitated, looking from the string to the sky. The kite fluttered wildly for a moment. Tom moved behind her, gently guiding her hands. "Hold it like this," he signed, showing her how to keep the tension steady. She nodded, focusing on the movement. The wind tugged at the kite, and suddenly it rose higher, its tail spinning in wide circles. Ella gasped. The kite danced against the blue sky, and even though she couldn't hear the flapping, she could feel it, the pull, the vibration, the rhythm of it all. She turned to look at Tom, her face glowing with excitement. "It's flying." She signed quickly. He grinned and nodded. "You're doing it." Leo clapped his hands and jumped around them, shouting something she couldn't hear but easily understood. He was proud of her. For the next hour they laughed, played, and took turns flying the kite. The grass under their feet was soft and the sun painted everything in gold. At one point, when the kite got tangled in a tree branch, Leo groaned dramatically, pointing up at it. Tom shook his head with a playful sigh and said something to his son that made him giggle. Ella watched the two of them, their easy connection, their shared laughter, and felt a warm ache in her chest. She wondered what it would feel like to have moments like that with her own father. After Tom managed to untangle the kite, they all sat down to rest. He took out a small lunchbox from his bag and offered her a sandwich. She hesitated for a second but accepted it gratefully. They ate quietly under the shade of the tree, with Leo humming to himself and drawing shapes in the dirt with a stick. After a few bites, Tom signed, "So, your father works a lot?" Ella looked down at her sandwich, then nodded. "He's always busy. Meetings, calls, business trips. He doesn't have much time." Tom's hands slowed before he signed again. "That must be hard for you." She thought for a moment before signing. "I don't blame him. He tries, but it's lonely sometimes." He nodded in understanding. "Leo misses his mother a lot. I work too, but I try to be home before dinner. Sometimes it's hard, but I don't want him to grow up thinking he's alone." She looked at him thoughtfully. His words stayed with her. "I don't want him to grow up thinking he's alone." That sentence hit something deep inside her. She wanted to tell him how much she admired that. How much she wished her father would understand that time was more valuable than gifts. But instead she just smiled and nodded. Leo came running back to them, holding a small cupcake in his hands. It looked slightly squished, but he offered it proudly. "Birthday cake," he said. Ella blinked in surprise and looked at Tom. He chuckled and signed, "We bought cupcakes yesterday." Leo wanted to share. Leo held it out to her again, and she took it carefully. The frosting was pink with tiny sprinkles. She smiled and signed to Leo. "Thank you." He grinned wide and said, "You're welcome." Then he sat beside her, watching her take a bite. The sweetness hit her tongue, and she couldn't help but laugh silently. It was messy, soft, and perfect. Tom watched the two of them, his eyes soft. "You know," he signed, "you should teach Leo more signs. He's been trying to learn." Leo nodded eagerly, his little hands moving clumsily as he tried to sign friend. Ella laughed and showed him the right motion. They practiced for a few minutes, and friend, thank you, happy, play. Leo got most of them wrong at first, but he laughed each time and she patiently showed him again. By the end, he managed to sign happy correctly, his small hands moving in the right rhythm. She clapped silently, and he beamed with pride. As the afternoon faded into golden light, Tom looked at his watch. "We should go soon," he signed. "I have to take Leo home for dinner." Ella nodded, though she didn't want the day to end. Leo hugged her quickly before running ahead. She froze in surprise, then smiled, her heart melting a little. Tom noticed her reaction and chuckled. "He likes you," he signed. She smiled shyly and signed, "I like him too." "He's funny," Tom nodded. "He has his mother's energy." She hesitated, then signed softly, "You're a good father." For a moment, Tom didn't move. Then he smiled, a little embarrassed but grateful. "Thank you. I just do my best." They walked together toward the park exit. The world around them was quiet, but the silence between them didn't feel empty. It felt comfortable, like two people who didn't need words to understand each other. Before they parted ways, Tom signed, "We'll come again tomorrow. Maybe we can bring something to draw together?" Her eyes lit up. "Yes, I'd love that." He smiled and waved as they left. Ella stood there for a while after they were gone, watching the space where they had been. The kite string was still in her hand, and the tail of the kite fluttered softly in the breeze. When she returned home, her father was sitting in the living room, his laptop open. He looked up briefly when she entered. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, his voice tired. "Did you have a good day?" She nodded. He gave her a distracted smile before looking back at his screen. "That's good." She stood there for a moment, wanting to say something, to tell him about the park, about Tom and Leo, about flying a kite for the first time. But his eyes were already back on his work, so she just turned and went upstairs quietly. In her room, she opened her sketchbook again. Inside, she drew a picture of the kite flying high in the sky. Below it, she drew 3 small figures, a man, a boy, and a girl, their hands all holding the same string. Then she took a small sticky note and wrote one line under the drawing. Sometimes, the people we meet by chance teach us how to feel seen. She smiled as she closed her sketchbook. For the first time in a long while, she felt that her world wasn't so small anymore. And as she drifted off to sleep that night, she dreamed of the park, the laughter she couldn't hear but could feel, and the simple joy of flying a kite with someone who spoke her language. The morning started quietly in the Larkins' house as usual. The sunlight slipped through the tall windows, lighting up the marble floors. But the air inside felt cold and still. Ella sat at the dining table with her breakfast untouched. Her father, Charles, was standing near the door, phone pressed to his ear, already talking about business before finishing his coffee. She watched his lips move quickly, his brow furrowing as he spoke. Even without hearing the words, she could tell the call was about work. It always was. When he ended the call, she signed softly, "Are you leaving again?" He looked at her and sighed. "Just for a few hours. I have a meeting downtown," he said slowly, trying to make sure she could read his lips. "I'll be home for dinner, I promise." She nodded, though she had heard that promise many times before. He gave her a quick pat on the shoulder before leaving. The sound of the door closing echoed faintly through the big house. Ella looked at her plate again. The pancakes were cold now. She pushed them away and decided to go to the park earlier than usual. The weather was bright and calm. The same old oak tree stood tall and the air smelled of fresh grass. As she walked closer, she saw Tom sitting on the bench with Leo on his lap, both eating ice cream. When Leo spotted her, he waved so fast that his ice cream nearly fell. Tom laughed and steadied the cone before waving to her. Ella smiled, her mood instantly lifting. Tom signed, "Good morning. You're early today." She nodded and signed back. "I wanted to get some fresh air." He looked at her carefully for a moment. "Everything okay?" She hesitated, then signed, "Just tired of being alone." Tom gave a small nod, understanding immediately. "Sometimes silence can feel heavier at home," he signed. Ella smiled sadly. "You know that feeling too?" He looked down and signed, "I used to. After my wife passed away, the house felt too quiet." Leo's laughter helped me remember that silence doesn't have to mean sadness. She thought about that. Maybe her silence could mean something else too. Maybe it didn't always have to hurt. Leo tugged at her sleeve, pulling her out of her thoughts. He held up a drawing he'd made on a small piece of paper. It was of 3 stick figures, a man, a boy, and a girl, all holding hands. Ella smiled wide. "That's us," she signed playfully. Leo nodded proudly. "Family," he said, pointing at the picture. Tom chuckled and signed to her. "He's decided you're part of the team now." Ella laughed silently, signing back. "I like that." They spent the morning drawing together. Tom drew cars and trees while Ella sketched faces and flowers. Leo added wild scribbles and said they were clouds. At one point, a breeze blew through the park and Ella looked up at the sky. It was clear blue, stretching endlessly above them. For the first time in years, she felt light, like the sky had room for her too. Then something unexpected happened. A sleek black car stopped near the park's gate. The driver stepped out first, followed by a tall man in a dark suit. It was her father. Ella froze. Charles Larkins looked completely out of place among the park benches and children. His expensive shoes sank slightly in the grass as he scanned the area, his expression tight. When his eyes landed on Ella, relief flashed across his face. But then confusion followed as he noticed the man and the boy sitting with her. He walked toward them quickly. Ella stood up, feeling nervous. Tom noticed immediately and stood too, politely placing his hands in his pockets. When Charles reached them, he spoke sharply. "Ella, what are you doing here? You didn't tell anyone you were leaving the house." She looked down, signing, "I just came to the park. I always come here." He frowned, clearly frustrated. "Alone? Anything could have happened." Tom stepped forward slightly, speaking calmly. "Sir, she wasn't alone. We've seen each other at the park several times. My son and I were with her." Charles turned toward him, his tone still guarded. "And you are?" "Tom Rivera," he said, holding out his hand. I run a small repair shop nearby. Charles didn't take the hand immediately. He looked at Tom's simple clothes, the dirt under his nails from working with machines, then slowly shook it. I see. Well, thank you for looking out for my daughter. Tom nodded politely. She's a wonderful girl. We just spend time here, drawing and talking. Talking? Charles asked, puzzled. Tom smiled gently and began signing, in her language. Ella watched as her father's eyes widened slightly. For a moment, Charles said nothing. He glanced between Tom's hands and his daughter's bright expression, and something changed in his face. A mix of surprise and guilt. You know sign language? He asked quietly. Tom nodded. My wife was deaf. I learned for her. Charles didn't answer. He looked at Ella, who was standing there with hope in her eyes. Hope that maybe her father would say something kind, something real. Instead, he sighed. Ella, it's time to go home. Her shoulders fell. Tom gave her a reassuring smile and signed. It's okay. I'll see you soon. She nodded, trying to smile back. She turned to Leo, who waved and signed. Bye, friend. She signed back, Bye, Leo. As she followed her father toward the car, she glanced back once more. Tom waved, and she waved back until he was out of sight. The ride home was silent. Her father didn't say anything, and she didn't know how to ask what he was thinking. When they reached the house, he finally turned to her and said slowly so she could read his lips. You shouldn't go out alone like that. I was worried. She nodded but signed firmly. I wasn't alone. They are my friends. He paused, watching her hands move. I saw that man signing. He seemed kind. She looked surprised. He is. And his son, too. Charles nodded slowly, looking thoughtful. You seemed happy with them. Her eyes softened. I am. He sighed and leaned back in his chair. For years he had buried himself in work, convincing himself that money could replace time, that providing comfort was enough. But seeing his daughter with strangers, smiling, laughing, communicating freely, made him realize how far away he had drifted. Later that evening, he knocked on her bedroom door. She was sitting at her desk, sketching as usual. When she turned, he spoke carefully. Ella, can I sit? She nodded, surprised. He sat down beside her and hesitated before speaking again. I didn't know you had friends at the park. She smiled softly and signed. They understand me. He nodded. I could see that. He paused, struggling for words. You looked happy. Happier than I've seen you in a long time. She looked down at her drawing, not sure how to reply. Then he said something she didn't expect. Can you teach me some sign language? Her eyes widened. He smiled awkwardly. I want to talk to you the way you talk. Maybe you can start with something simple? Her face lit up with joy. She nodded quickly and signed, Yes, I can teach you. He laughed softly, watching her hands move. Okay, what's the first word? She thought for a moment, then signed the word love. He tried to copy her, his fingers stiff and unsure. She giggled silently, correcting his hand shape gently. After a few tries, he finally got it right. When he signed it correctly, she clapped her hands in excitement. He smiled, a little embarrassed but deeply moved. Love, he said again, this time more confidently. For the rest of the evening, they practiced simple signs. Thank you, good, happy, father, daughter. Each one made them laugh a little more, and for the first time in years, the house didn't feel so cold. Later that night, after her father went to bed, Ella stood by her window and looked out toward the park. She couldn't see it from this distance, but she knew Tom and Leo were probably there the next day waiting for her. She smiled, thinking about how things had changed. Her father was learning to speak her language. The silence that had once surrounded her life now felt softer, filled with connection instead of emptiness. She opened her sketchbook and drew a new picture. Her father sitting beside her, both of them signing to each other. Underneath it, she wrote a small line. Sometimes strangers remind the people who love us how to listen. Then she closed her book gently and whispered in her heart the word she had taught him that evening. Love. A week passed since that quiet evening when Ella had started teaching her father sign language. Every day after dinner, they would sit together for half an hour and practice. At first, Charles struggled to remember the movements, mixing up words and laughing at his own mistakes. But Ella was patient with him, guiding his hands gently and smiling every time he got one right. Their home slowly began to change. The big house that once felt empty now had something new inside it. Connection. There was still silence, but it wasn't cold anymore. It was comfortable, shared, and peaceful. One morning, Charles came downstairs earlier than usual, not wearing his business suit but a casual shirt. Ella looked surprised when she saw him at the table. He smiled and signed clumsily. "Good morning." She laughed softly and signed back. "Good morning, Dad." He sat beside her and said, "I thought maybe I could come to the park with you today. You could show me where you always go." Her eyes widened. He had never asked her that before. For a second she didn't believe he meant it, but he smiled reassuringly and she nodded eagerly. A few hours later they were walking side by side toward the park. Charles carried a small basket with sandwiches and juice. Ella carried her sketchbook, her steps full of excitement. When they arrived, she looked around for the familiar faces. Tom and Leo were sitting under the old oak tree again, surrounded by paper and crayons. When Leo saw Ella, he jumped up and ran toward her, waving his small hands in excitement. She crouched down and signed. "Hi, Leo." He grinned and signed back. "Hi, Ella." Then he stopped when he saw Charles behind her. The boy tilted his head curiously, hiding slightly behind Ella. Tom stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans, and walked over with a friendly smile. "Mr. Larkins," he greeted politely. Charles nodded, returning the smile. "Please call me Charles. I wanted to thank you for being kind to my daughter." Tom shrugged modestly. "She's easy to be kind to. She's special." Charles looked at Ella, who was standing between them, smiling shyly. "Yes," he said softly. "She really is." They all sat under the oak tree together. Leo immediately pulled out his crayons and began drawing on the grass. Ella joined him, showing him how to shade the sky with soft strokes. Charles watched quietly, his expression mixed with awe and regret. He had spent so many years chasing success, yet he had missed moments like this. Simple, small moments that felt more valuable than anything he'd ever bought. After a while, Tom offered him a sandwich. "You work nearby?" he asked. Charles nodded. "Yes, but I rarely take breaks like this." "I should have, though." "I didn't realize how much I was missing." Tom smiled knowingly. "Life doesn't wait for us to be ready. Kids grow faster than we think." Charles nodded, understanding too well what he meant. When Leo finished his drawing, he held it up proudly. "Look, that's us." Even though she couldn't hear his voice, Ella could tell from his big grin what he said. She leaned in to see the drawing. A big tree, 4 stick figures holding hands, and a bright sun above them. She pointed at it and signed to Leo. "Beautiful." He giggled and added a little bird in the corner of the page. Charles watched his daughter and the boy play, then turned to Tom. "You're raising a wonderful kid," he said sincerely. Tom smiled. "Thank you. He keeps me going." Charles hesitated for a moment before saying, "You know, I used to think giving Ella everything she wanted meant I was being a good father. The big house, the best school, every toy she asked for. But now I see she never wanted those things. She just wanted me." Tom nodded quietly. "Kids don't remember what you bought them. They remember who was there." Charles looked at his daughter again, her laughter silent but full of light, and felt something shift deep inside him. He wanted to make up for lost time, even if it took the rest of his life. When they finished eating, Ella pulled out her sketchbook and started drawing again. Tom leaned closer to see. It was a picture of all 4 of them. Herself, Leo, Tom, and her father, sitting together under the tree. Charles smiled when he saw it. "That's beautiful," he said, and she looked up at him with shining eyes. Then she signed slowly, "This is my favorite day." He didn't need anyone to translate. He understood every movement of her hands. He reached out and gently signed back. "Mine too." Tom watched quietly, a small smile playing on his lips. They stayed in the park until the sun began to set. The golden light filtered through the trees, turning everything warm and soft. Leo had fallen asleep on the grass, his head resting on his father's leg. Ella sat beside them, sketching quietly while Charles watched her hands move gracefully across the page. He leaned toward Tom and said softly, "You've done more for my daughter than I ever could." "You reminded her how to smile again." Tom shook his head. She already had that light inside her. She just needed someone to see it. Charles nodded, his eyes misty. "Still, I'm grateful. I'd like to repay you somehow." Tom smiled faintly. You just did, by being here. A silence settled between them, but it was the kind of silence that felt full, not empty. As the sky darkened, they began to pack up. Charles carried Leo to Tom's car while Ella walked beside them, holding her sketchbook against her chest. Before leaving, Tom signed to Ella, "We'll see you again soon?" She nodded quickly. "Yes, promise." Then Leo, half asleep, mumbled, "Bye, Ella," and waved one small hand. She waved back, smiling until their car disappeared around the corner. The ride home was calm. Charles drove slowly, occasionally glancing at his daughter who sat by the window watching the fading sunset. He said softly, "You really like them, don't you?" She nodded and signed, "They make me feel normal." He thought about her words for a moment, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. Then he said, "You are normal, Ella. You're just different in the best way. You see things others don't." She looked at him, her eyes shining. When they reached home, he surprised her again. He walked to his study, came back holding a small box and handed it to her. She looked at him curiously before opening it. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet. On it were engraved the words, "Always heard in my heart." Her breath caught. He signed slowly, a little awkwardly. "I can't always speak your language perfectly yet, but I'll keep learning. You'll never have to feel unheard again." Tears filled her eyes and she hugged him tightly. He wrapped his arms around her, realizing this was the first real hug they'd shared in years. Later that night, as Ella lay in bed, she thought about everything that had changed. A few weeks ago, she had spent her birthday alone, wondering if anyone could ever truly understand her world. Now she had friends who spoke her language and a father who was learning to. She picked up her sketchbook one last time and turned to a new page. She drew a picture of herself sitting between two worlds, one filled with sound, the other with silence, and in the middle, she drew a bridge made of hands signing words of love and kindness. Below it, she wrote in small letters, "I used to think silence was lonely. Now I know silence can be beautiful when it's shared." The next morning, Charles and Ella went to the park again. Tom and Leo were already there, waving as they approached. Charles carried a picnic basket and Ella ran ahead, her laughter echoing in her father's heart even if it made no sound. They spent the day together, drawing, flying a kite, sharing stories through signs and smiles. And as the sun dipped low behind the trees, Charles looked around and realized something simple yet powerful. Happiness wasn't about money, success, or perfection. It was about connection, about being seen, understood, and loved exactly as you are. Ella sat beside him, her hair glowing in the evening light, and he signed gently to her. "Happy late birthday, my girl." She smiled, tears shining in her eyes, and signed back, "Best birthday ever." And this time it truly was.